Hello and welcome to the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and your confidence coach, Anna Manning. And today I'm going to share something that I've seen many times, but maybe haven't quite had the words to describe. So sometimes, even though you might be really good at what you do, really capable, you might get kind of stuck. And when you're kind of stuck, you might feel like you're spinning your wheels, you banging your head against a brick wall, you keep coming up against a problem. And in that moment, for my people, they find themselves doubting, wondering, worrying if they're the problem, ending up in a low confidence cycle from which it can be difficult to climb out of. So I honestly did not know what to call this episode. I'm like, is it why smart people get stuck? Is it you are not the problem? Is it the invisible trap of how things should be? I don't know. So we're going to figure this one out together. And I'm going to share a bit of the work that I've done with one of my clients who is about to complete her coaching. With her kind permission, I'm going to share a little bit of her story with you. Because when she came to me, she was really stuck. She had ended up in this low confidence cycle where she was doubting, where she was worrying, where she was wondering, where she was procrastinating, where she wasn't able to be as effective as she knew she could be. She didn't lack capability. And it wasn't that she was being lazy. She was stuck because she was trying to operate in a system, in an organization where the way she liked to work was not the way that the organization worked. So her general way of doing things, her approach, didn't really work in this particular organization because it was a really different kind of environment. Let's say you like really structured environments where things are really clear, they're really strategic, and people, follow a process. But actually, your workplace or your team is super scrappy. Another one is if you like really clear direction from your boss, say, but your boss is very ambiguous. Let's say you like colleagues to be really organized, but yours are quite chaotic. One of mine that I experienced when I was working was I was in a particular working group for something that I was doing. And I wanted people to think about the big picture, the potential for change. And all they could talk about was the fact that the telephone system wouldn't be able to handle that change. And I literally wanted to bang my head against the table because I am thinking big picture, the vision for what could be different. And you're talking to me about the telephone system? Like, I have no idea what is going on here. So I have a preference, right, for how I like to work. I like to be able to see the big picture. I like to be able to strategize. I like to be able to kind of think about vision, about what's possible. But this person talking about the telephone system obviously wants to think through minutiae and all of that, right? In theory, neither of us are right or wrong. But when we have a preference for working and we are in an environment where that preference, for whatever reason, isn't really being met, we can get in this loop where we assume that we are the problem somehow, and then we start to doubt ourselves. Now, in my instance, that didn't happen. I thought, oh my God, what's wrong with them? But I might instead have said, no, everyone else is thinking about the telephone system. And here I am trying to take them into the big picture. And I would have continued to just bang my head against a wall and try and get traction when my way of doing things just wasn't really going to work. And this was what was happening for my client. Her way of doing things, being structured, bringing order, which ironically was kind of what they'd hired her to do, actually in their environment just wasn't working. And so rather than do what I did and think, oh my God, what's wrong with them? She thought, oh my God, what's wrong with me? And then, of course, if you're stuck in an environment and you can't seem to get traction and your way of working doesn't seem to work, you could just assume there's something wrong with you, end up in a low confidence cycle and bang your head against a wall. What I see with clients is there's a kind of leak in that moment where they stop adapting to the situation. They, in truth, want the environment to change, to be different. And because that then leads them to be in that low confidence cycle, they can become passive or procrastinate, and their agency, their ability to be effective diminishes. And actually, even in my example, my ability to be effective definitely did diminish. I wasn't flexible enough to be able to look at what was going on in that environment, really use my emotional intelligence and think, okay, well, they want to think about things one way, I want to think about things another. How can we move forward? Instead, I just got frustrated. Similar but different with my client. Instead of thinking, okay, well, I like to do things this way, but it doesn't seem to be possible in this environment. What could I do? How could I adapt to this? You can't stay in that mode of, in my example, to use my emotional intelligence, or in her example, to have that step back and think, how could I handle this? What is it that I could achieve? What might be possible? How could I flex to get something rather than nothing? And where does that leave you? It leaves you in a kind of loop where your confidence is being eroded because there's some kind of mismatch. I want to do things this way. That doesn't seem to work. There's repeated frustration because it's not working. I keep trying. I keep trying based on how I think it should be, and it keeps not working. There's still no improvement. And then all the way along that loop, self-doubt is entering. And every time you go around that loop, the self-doubt increases just a little bit more. So people's confidence in this instance doesn't collapse because they've failed. It collapses because they keep applying that same strategy that doesn't actually work in that context. And they then make the conclusion that they don't work, or that they're not good enough, and that's why their strategy isn't working. It's because of them. It isn't. It's simply because their strategy that might work really well somewhere else doesn't work in this particular environment. Your strategy, for instance, let's say of being really structured and bringing a lot of order and a deep understanding of a problem, may not work in an environment where all the information is a mess. It's totally scrappy. We're flying by the seat of our pants, and we've just got to do what we can with what we've got. If you keep trying to apply, to use my client's example, the same strategy to that environment and it keeps not working, so you keep not seeing any improvement, and every time you go round that loop and bang your head against that particular wall, the self-doubt starts to increase and increase and increase. Your self-doubt gets to a point where it's taken over, where you're probably sitting at your desk completely unable to do anything because you're stuck. So if you're thinking, yeah, this has actually happened to me, I want you to notice that sometimes we can make the leap to thinking that we're the problem when we're not. It might be that the strategy that we're applying, which doesn't work, is a bit of a problem, but that's not the same thing. So to keep using this example, yes, my client's preference might be to work in an environment where there's structure and rigor and a deep understanding based on good information. But they might be operating in an environment where that is just not possible. So instead of assuming that I'm the problem, you'd start asking, okay, how could I operate most efficiently within this environment? Some environments are just not ideal, either because they're just not ideal or because they're not ideal for you based on your preferences and how you like to work. Some of our bosses may not be ideal, given our preferences or how we like to work. We may not be able to change the environment that we're in unless we leave, and we may not be able to change our boss. And if we assume the reason that we're struggling to operate within this environment or with this person is just because we're fatally flawed, then we find ourselves in a low confidence cycle, for sure. But there's another version of events which says, this isn't the environment that I prefer, or this isn't the boss that I prefer. And it's the reality of the situation that I'm in right now. Sometimes when we get stuck, it's because we're stuck in an environment or a way of working or a style of working that just isn't our preference. And there's a version of the world that says, oh, these people are mad. They work in a totally shit way and it's really annoying. Now, taking that attitude probably wouldn't damage your confidence. But there's another version of the world which does, where you start to wonder, is it me? Am I the problem? And, ultimately, if you're working in an environment that is completely different from how you like to work, and that leads you to be banging your head against the wall and then getting into a low confidence cycle, the awful thing is that in that environment, in that instance, maybe you do become the problem because you cannot operate effectively from a low confidence cycle. And if you don't know what I'm talking about in terms of that low confidence cycle, go to the show notes, click the link, take the confidence assessment. It will tell you whether or not you're in a low confidence cycle, and it will give you some personalized guidance as to what you might need to do to get out of it. Because what that low confidence cycle does is it makes anxiety and worry and doubt a daily working issue that you then have to do on top of your day job. But look at this client. We've been working together for not even 3 months, right? And she declares, I am not the problem. Boom. And she also says, when I assume I am, I'm exhausting myself, I'm stuck in my own mind, and I burn myself out. So if you're like her, where you're exhausting yourself, you're stuck in your own mind and you're burning yourself out, things can change. And the change doesn't have to look like I either blame myself and it all goes on to me, which gets you in a low confidence cycle, exhausted, stuck, and burnt out. It doesn't have to go all the way to, or I blame everything on them. Maybe you just are who you are and you like to work how you like to work. And maybe they are just who they are and they work how they like to work. Or maybe the organization or the environment just is what it is. Imagine if we didn't have to put blame anywhere. And instead we just said, okay, this may not be the easiest environment for me to operate in, but what is possible? What can I do? How could I work which would give me the best chance of getting to a goal that I've got or producing a result that the organization or I want? Because you can bet your bottom dollar that ending up stuck, exhausted in your own mind and in a low confidence cycle is not going to deliver any of that. You assume that you're the problem. You exhaust yourself, you get stuck in your own mind, you burn yourself out. You also will criticize yourself, doubt yourself, police yourself to within an inch of your life, compare yourself to other people negatively, and probably not notice any progress that you have made. So if you get stuck, come back and listen to this episode again. Or if you're stuck right now, think about whether the way you like to work is somehow in conflict with the situation that you find yourself in. Because if you can see it, you at least have some agency. Most people come to me once they've already assumed they're the problem, kept trying, it's kept not working, and they've ended up at such a low ebb, in such a low confidence cycle, that they come to me burnt out and exhausted and totally stuck, largely unable to see a way out. There's always a way out, and it might not even be out of the organization. It might not even be out of the team. It might be, and it might not be. The place we really need to get you out of is the thinking trap loop, which has created the stuck place that you might find yourself in. Once we can get you out of that, you can decide clearly and cleanly, is this a good place for me to be or not? And you might decide that it's not. Great. And you might decide that it is. Also great. All right. That is what I have for you this week, with great thanks to my client who, let's face it, is completely epic, is very capable, is very competent, and now has the confidence to match. So thank you to her. And if you would like to come build your professional confidence with me, head to the link in the show notes, book a call and come and ask me about coaching together one-on-one. Maybe in 3 months' time, the story of your absolute triumph will be appearing on the podcast. Imagine that. All right, I will see you in next week's episode. Bye.
Confidence. confident, confident, I can be confident, 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 I can be confident at work.